The grand chamber of the High Synod did not echo, for the walls were composed of a sound-dampening void stone that absorbed the nervous whispers of 1,000 delegates, leaving only the oppressive silence of anticipation hanging heavy in the recycled air. This was the heart of the Ethelgardian hegemony, a civilization that had spanned the stars for 10,000 cycles, masters of the vacuum, architects of the silent dark. And yet, in this moment, the air was thick with a primal, suffocating dread that transcended their technological supremacy. At the center of the amphitheater, hovering within a containment field of pure starlight, was the holographic projection of a single, terrifying celestial body. Sol III, the death world known to its inhabitants as Earth. To the Ethelgard, creatures who had evolved on arid, low-gravity moons and lived their lives in the sterile safety of pressurized void cities, the image was the stuff of nightmares, a chaotic, swirling marble of blue and white where the atmospheric pressure alone was enough to crush a heavy cruiser. But it was the liquid, the relentless, shifting, unconquerable liquid covering 70% of the surface, that induced a visceral recoil in every eye that beheld it. They called it the drowning sphere, a place where the fundamental laws of stability were mocked by the fluidity of an element that refused to be tamed, an element that shifted, crashed, and destroyed with a mindless fury that the Ethelgardian logic engines could not predict. High Counselor Vrexel, his carapace polished to a dull obsidian sheen that reflected the terrifying blue light of the hologram, raised a slender, trembling, manipulating limb to silence the murmurs that had begun to rise despite the acoustic dampening, his voice projecting through the neural link amplifiers with a tremor of gravity that demanded attention, though his own internal organs were clenched in a spasm of fear. He looked out at the assembly, at the myriad species that had bowed to the hegemony's order, all of them united now in a singular paralysis, their collective gaze fixed on the watery hellscape rotating slowly before them. "We have watched the drowning sphere for 300 cycles," Vrexel began, his tone low, vibrating with the weight of a history that was about to be shattered. "We have observed the creatures that cling to its dry archipelagos, the hairless bipeds that build fragile cities on the edge of the devouring blue, and we comforted ourselves with the certainty of physics, the certainty that a species evolved in such a high-gravity, high-pressure nightmare could never escape the crushing embrace of their own atmosphere." He paused, allowing the gravity of the statement to sink into the minds of the delegates, the silence stretching until it was a physical weight. "We were wrong. The sensors on the outer rim have confirmed the impossible. They have not only escaped the gravity well, they have brought the philosophy of their terrifying oceans with them into the void." A ripple of panicked bioluminescence flashed through the aquaticaverse species in the upper tiers, a silent scream of light that betrayed the terror gripping the assembly, for the Ethelgardian philosophy was built on stasis, on the perfect, unchanging nature of the void, while the reports from Earth spoke of a species that thrived on chaos, on the violent interplay of fluid dynamics, on war not as a calculated exchange of energy, but as a storm. A hurricane of kinetics that mimicked the uncontrollable nature of their home. Diplomat Calith, a scholar of the ancient archives whose species had long ago transcended the need for physical mouths, projected a thought stream of skepticism that cut through the fear, a desperate attempt to cling to the old logic. "High Counselor," Calith interjected, the mental voice cool and analytical, though edged with doubt. "The parameters of the drowning sphere are hostile to advanced metallurgy, the oxidation rates, the pressure variance, the sheer unpredictability of their hydrosphere. Surely any vessel they construct would be heavy, cumbersome, a brute force coffin incapable of faster-than-light translation. We are the masters of the slipstream because we are light, we are empty, we are the void. They are dense, they are heavy, they cannot swim in the stars as we do." Vrexel turned his gaze toward the scholar, his eyes multifaceted and devoid of pity, for he had seen the telemetry that the scholar had not. He had seen the ghost readings that had terrified the military caste into silence. "You speak of swimming, Scholar Calith," Vrexel replied, and the word hung in the air like a curse. "That is precisely the error in our calculus. We treat the void as an absence, a nothingness to be traversed with minimal resistance. We build ships of lattice and light, fragile and swift. The humans, they do not see the void as empty, they see it as another ocean." The hologram of Earth flickered and anged, zooming out to the edge of the Sol system, where a red pulsing icon represented the anomaly that had triggered this emergency session. It was not a fleet of thousands, not a swarm of fighters, but a single object, massive beyond reasonable engineering, a behemoth of density and plating that defied the delicate aesthetics of the hegemony. They do not traverse the slipstream, Vrexel whispered, the horror evident in his voice. They displace it. They are plowing through the fabric of space-time as if it were water. They are bringing the pressure with them. The chamber erupted into chaos, not of noise, but of psychic distress and frantic data exchange, as thousands of minds realized the implication. A species that treated the vacuum of space with the same brute force hydrodynamics they used to navigate their terrifying oceans was a species that could not be stopped by shields designed to deflect lasers or particle beams. The weapon approaching them was not a ship in the traditional sense. It was a movable geological event, a kinetic hammer forged in the crushing depths of a world that tried to kill its children every day. The alarms of the citadel began to wail, a mournful, throbbing sound that resonated in the bones of every being present, signaling that the anomaly had breached the inner perimeter, bypassing the minefields and the distortion nets not by disarming them, but by simply smashing through them with a hull density that rendered the defensive measures irrelevant. "Defense grid status," Vrexel roared, abandoning his diplomatic composure as the red dot on the hologram accelerated with terrifying speed. "Why are the interceptors not engaging?" The answer came from the supreme commander of the fleet, a towering, chitinous warlord named Thrax, who stood near the base of the podium, his four arms crossed in a posture of defeated resignation. "We fired, High Counselor," Thrax rumbled, his voice grinding like tectonic plates. "We fired thermal lances, we fired gravity disruptors, we fired the singularity cannons." The assembly went deathly still. The singularity cannons were the ultimate sanction, weapons that tore small holes in reality, capable of consuming capital ships in an instant. "And," Vrexel demanded, his voice cracking. Thrax pointed a claw at the main screen where a live optical feed replaced the tactical map. "The weapon impacted the ship. It absorbed the energy. It vented the heat into the surrounding vacuum as steam. They are using ablative armor layers of ice and carbon, kilometers thick. We did not damage them. We merely melted the first layer of their skin." On the screen, the monster emerged from the darkness of the outer system, and a collective gasp of horror sucked the oxygen from the room. It was ugly. It was magnificent. It was terrifying. It was not a sleek silver needle like the ships of the hegemony, nor was it a geometric crystal. It was a dark, brooding leviathan, shaped like the predators that roamed Earth's deep trenches. A long, tapered cylinder of scarred, matte black metal, studded with sensor spines that looked like the bristles of a deep-sea worm. It had no visible engines, only a shimmering distortion at the rear that suggested a propulsion system based on gravitational displacement, pushing the universe behind it to propel itself forward. But it was the sheer scale that broke the minds of the onlookers. The vessel was the size of a small moon, a traveling continent of alloy and water, a closed ecosystem that carried the weight of a world within its belly. Along its hull, in glowing white letters that burned against the darkness, was a designation in the guttural, sharp language of the humans, UNS Sargasso, *. "They are hailing us," the communications officer announced, her voice trembling so violently she could barely articulate the words. "Wideband transmission, analog and digital, audio, visual, and harmonic." Vrexel gripped the podium, his knuckles turning white. "Harmonic?" he asked. "They are broadcasting a vibration through the hull of the station," the officer replied, clutching her sensory organs. "It feels heavy. It feels like the weight of an ocean pressing against the mind." The station groaned, the very superstructure vibrating in sympathy with the incoming signal, a deep, rhythmic thrumming that sounded like the heartbeat of a dying star. "Put it on screen," Vrexel ordered, bracing himself for the roar of a monster. "Let us see the face of the conquerors who bring the terrible war." The screen flickered, static washing over the image before stabilizing to reveal the bridge of the Sargasso *. It was dimly lit, bathed in a soothing bioluminescent blue glow that mimicked the twilight zone of an ocean. There were no frantic crew members, no militaristic shouting, no rows of soldiers in power armor. Instead, the bridge was a quiet, cavernous space where figures moved with slow, deliberate grace, wearing sleek, skin-tight suits that pulsed. With soft light, in the center, seated not on a throne but on a simple, utilitarian command chair, sat a human. He was older, his hair the color of steel wool, his face etched with deep lines that spoke of immense pressure endured over a lifetime. He did not look angry. He did not look arrogant. He looked incredibly, terrifyingly calm. He looked like a stone at the bottom of a river, unmoved by the rushing current. "I am Admiral Halloway of the United Nations of Earth," the human spoke, his voice deep and resonant, translated instantly by the universal linguistic matrix. He did not shout. He spoke with the quiet authority of a man who does not need to raise his voice to be heard over the storm. We received your warning shots. We interpreted them as a navigational hazard rather than an act of aggression, given their ineffectiveness. The insult was delivered without a hint of mockery, merely as a statement of fact, which made it burn all the hotter in the minds of the Ethel-Guardian High Command. Vrexel stepped forward, projecting his image back to the human ship. "You have violated the sovereignty of the hegemony," Vrexel declared, trying to summon the majesty of his office. "You bring a warship of illegal tonnage into our capital system. You threaten the peace of the 10,000 cycles. Explain your presence, or we will mobilize the Grand Fleet." Holloway blinked, a slow, deliberate motion. He leaned forward slightly, and the camera tracked the movement. "The Grand Fleet?" Holloway repeated, glancing at a readout on his armrest. "You mean the collection of fragile energy lattice vessels currently holding position 3 light seconds off our port bow? We have scanned them. They are beautiful, elegant, but they are built for the vacuum. They are built for a universe where nothing pushes back." The human paused, his eyes locking onto Vrexel's with an intensity that felt physical. "We are not here to war with you, High Counselor. If we were here for war, we would not have knocked. We would have simply increased our gravitational wake and shattered your station like a glass bottle in a depth charge." A silence deeper than the void fell over the council. The threat was plain, undeniable, and backed by the sheer physical reality of the mountain of metal parked outside their window. Then why? Vrexel whispered, his arrogance finally cracking under the pressure. "Why have you come from the drowning sphere? Why leave your gravity well?" "Because the water is rising," Holloway said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming somber. "Not on Earth, in the universe. You call space a void. You believe it is empty. You build your empires on the assumption that the dark between the stars is nothingness." He stood up, walking to the viewport of his own ship, looking out at the glittering stars of the hegemony. "You are wrong. We discovered the truth 50 years ago in the Marianas Trench. When you go deep enough, when the pressure becomes high enough, you realize that reality itself has viscosity. The universe isn't empty, Counselor. It is a fluid, a dark, heavy, invisible ocean of dark matter and energy." Holloway turned back to the camera. "And there is a tide coming, a cosmic tsunami. We detected the wavefront moving through the galactic core. It will hit your sector in 3 standard days. Your shields are designed to stop lasers. They are not designed to stop a tidal wave of gravity." The High Council erupted again, this time in denial. "Preposterous," shouted the science minister of the Krell, a logical cybernetic species. "Our sensors show nothing. The vacuum is stable. This is a deception, a psychological tactic to force submission." Holloway did not argue. He merely tapped a command on his console. "Sending telemetry now. Look at the gravimetric shear. Look at the compression waves. You don't see it because you aren't looking for water. You're looking for fire. You're looking for radiation. But the threat isn't radiation, it's pressure." As the data flooded the hegemony's mainframes, the skepticism began to bleed away, replaced by a cold, creeping horror. The numbers were there, subtle, insidious, but undeniable. A massive gravitational distortion was propagating through the sector, an invisible wall of force that was compressing space-time ahead of it. It was, in every mathematical sense, a wave of crushed reality light-years high, moving at near-light speed. And the hegemony, with their delicate crystal cities and lattice ships, were standing on the beach, unaware that the sea was pulling back to gather strength for the strike. "If this is true," Vrexel said, his voice trembling, "then we are already dead. Our shields cannot withstand gravitational shearing. Our hulls will shatter. Our atmosphere domes will implode." He looked at the human, seeing for the first time not a monster, but a survivor. "Why tell us? Why not let the wave wipe us out and claim the ruins?" Holloway smiled, a sad, weary smile. "Because on Earth, when the storm comes, you don't lock your doors and let your neighbors drown. The ocean teaches us one thing above all else: no one survives alone. The sea is too big and we are too small. We learn to build hulls that can take the crush. We learn to link our arms against the current." He gestured to the massive ship behind him. "The Sargasso isn't just a ship, it's a breakwater. We are an anchor. We can generate a localized high-density field, a bubble of artificial gravity that mimics the core of a planet. We can create a calm patch in the storm." You would shield us?" Diplomat Kaleth asked, the thought stream soft with wonder. "You would place your vessel between the wave and our station? You would take the impact?" "We are built for pressure," Holloway said simply. "We are humans. We were born in gravity. We evolved fighting the weight of the air, the weight of the water, the weight of our own history. This is what we do. We hold the line." The next 48 hours were a blur of unprecedented cooperation and terrifying suspense. The xenophobic paranoia of the hegemony dissolved in the face of imminent annihilation, replaced by a desperate, frantic reliance on the humans. The Sargasso, moved into position, placing its immense bulk directly in the path of the invisible oncoming wall. The Guardian engineers, once arrogant in their mastery of void tech, found themselves humbled as they boarded the human vessel to coordinate the shield frequencies. They walked the corridors of the asterisk Sargasso with wide eyes, marveling at the brutalist industrial aesthetic. Where Guardian ships were silent and sterile, the Sargasso hummed. Pipes hissed with hydraulic fluid, massive bulkheads groaned under stress, the air smelled of ozone and recycled rain. It felt alive. It felt like a beast. Deep within the bowels of the ship, in the engineering bay, human chief engineer O'Malley briefed a group of alien scientists. "Forget your particle deflectors," O'Malley barked, pointing to a schematic of the ship's gravity keel. "Think of this like a submarine. When the pressure hits, we don't fight it, we equalize it. We're going to pump terawatts of energy into the keel, creating a density shadow. The wave will hit us, and instead of smashing us, it will flow around us. We create a slipstream. Your station sits in our wake," an insected engineer chittered nervously. "But the stress on your hull, the calculations suggest structural failure is probable." O'Malley grinned, revealing teeth. "Yeah, well, that's why we built it out of hyperdense alloy and prayer. She'll hold. She's an Earth ship. She's stubborn." The waiting was the hardest part. The sensors of the station began to scream as the precursor waves hit. The stars in the distance began to distort, their light bending and smearing as the gravitational lens approached. The silence of the void was replaced by a sound that shouldn't exist in space, a deep, resonant groaning that was transmitted through the very fabric of reality, a sound felt in the teeth and the bones. It was the roar of the universe contracting. "Impact in 10 seconds, Holloway announced from the bridge, his voice broadcast to the entire terrified hegemony. "All hands brace for turbulence. Ethelgard Station, deactivate your active stabilization. Go limp, let us take the hit. If you fight the current, you break, flow with it." Vrexel sat in his high seat watching the main screen. The darkness ahead of them seemed to curdle, then it hit. It was not a flash of light, it was a slam. The entire universe seemed to lurch sideways. On the Sargasso asterisk, the lights flickered and died, replaced instantly by emergency red. The hull screamed, a cacophony of metal protesting against forces that could crush a planet. Holloway gripped his chair, his knuckles white, his eyes fixed on the structural integrity readout. "Hold," he whispered. "Hold, you beauty." The ship groaned, a sound like a dying whale, as the gravitational shear tried to twist it into scrap. The artificial gravity fluctuated wildly. Crew members were thrown against bulkheads. Unsecured equipment flew across the room, but the keel held. The density field flared, a bubble of stability in a chaotic ocean of force. Behind the asterisk Sargasso asterisk, the delicate crystal station of the Ethelgard shuddered. They felt the shockwave, but it was dampened, broken by the massive bulk of the human ship. They watched in awe as the asterisk Sargasso asterisk S shields flared not blue or green, but a deep, angry crimson, dissipating the energy as heat. The human ship was literally boiling the vacuum around it, creating a cloud of plasma that acted as a secondary buffer. For an hour, the storm raged, the universe howled, and in the center of the maelstrom, the humans stood firm, a rock in the river, unyielding, calm, professional. They did not panic. They adjusted power curves. They rerouted conduits. They fought the laws of physics with the stubborn determination of a species that had once looked at an ocean and decided to sail across it in wooden boats. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the wave passed. The distortion faded, continuing on its path into the deep dark, leaving the system battered but intact. The Sargasso drifted, listing slightly smoke venting from multiple hull breaches, its lights flickering, but it was there. It was whole. On the hegemony station, the silence returned, but it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of reverence. Vrexel stood up, his legs shaking. He looked at the screen, at the scarred, blackened hull of the human ship. "Status," he croaked. The image of Holloway returned. He had a cut on his forehead and his uniform was dusty, but he was smiling. He picked up a cup of coffee that had somehow survived the chaos and took a sip. "Station keeping is stable," Holloway reported. "We lost Quadrant 4's sensor array and the main drive is offline, but the hull integrity is at 80%. The leak in the galley has been plugged." He looked at Vrexel. "Is the station secure?" "We are intact," Vrexel said, realizing that he was bowing his head, a gesture of submission he had never offered to another species. You saved us all." "Just doing our job," Holloway said. "The ocean is big, we have to look out for each other." In the aftermath, the political landscape of the galaxy changed overnight. The terrible war that the Ethelgard had feared never came to pass. Instead, a new era began. The humans did not conquer with weapons, they conquered with competence. They conquered with the philosophy of the deep. The hegemony, realizing that their mastery of the calm, void left them vulnerable to the true chaotic nature of the universe, invited humanity to the High Council not as subjects, but as protectors, as the wardens of the deep. But the story did not end with the alliance. It was during the repairs, weeks later, that the true twist revealed itself. Scholar Calith and Admiral Halloway stood on the observation deck of the Sargasso looking out at the star field. Calith had been studying the data from the wave, the specific frequency of the gravitational shear that had nearly destroyed them. Admiral, Calith projected, the thought stream troubled. I have been analyzing the wavefront. In nature, a wave is caused by a disturbance. An earthquake causes a tsunami. A stone causes a ripple. Halloway nodded, looking out into the eternal night. I know where you're going with this, Calith. The wave that hit us, Calith continued. It was not a natural phenomenon, the harmonics. They were rhythmic, they were artificial, or biological. The scholar paused, the horror of the realization dawning. It was a wake, a displacement wake. Halloway turned to the alien, his face grim. We know, that's why we built the Sargasso. That's why we came out here. I do not understand, Calith said. If that wave was a wake, what created it? Halloway pressed a button on the console, bringing up a simulation of the galaxy. He zoomed out past the rim, past the known borders, into the deep intergalactic void. We thought Earth's oceans were unconquerable until we conquered them, Halloway said softly. Then we thought the void was empty, but it's not. It's a sea, and like any sea, there are things swimming in it. He pointed to a shadow moving in the deep dark on the simulation, a mass so large it dwarfed star clusters. The wave that had hit them, the wave that had nearly shattered a civilization, was merely the ripple caused by the fin of something passing by in the dark. The terrible war hasn't begun with the starship, Calith, Halloway said, his voice heavy with the burden of a guardian. The starship is the only reason we might survive what's coming. That wave wasn't an attack. It was just something moving. Something massive is waking up in the dark matter sea. We are the only ones who know how to build the boats. We are the only ones who know how to hunt the leviathans. Vrexel, monitoring the conversation from the council chamber, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold of space. He looked at the humans, at their bulky, ugly, resilient ships, and finally understood. They were not just survivors of a wet rock. They were the harpooners of the cosmos. The Ethelgard had spent 10,000 years playing in the shallows, thinking they were masters of the ocean. The humans had just arrived to tell them that there were sharks in the water and that the long night was just beginning. The human fleet began to jump into the system, ship after ship, massive, scarred, and ready. They didn't come as conquerors. They came as the wailing fleet. Get your people ready, counselor, Halloway said, looking into the camera with eyes that had seen the abyss and refused to blink. The water is getting deep, and we have a lot of work to do. As the transmission cut, the silence returned to the GR and chamber, but it was no longer the silence of stagnation. It was the silence of a crew waiting for the captain's order. The terrible war had indeed begun, not between species, but between life and the dark, hungry things that swam between the stars. And for the first time in history, the galaxy wasn't afraid, because the humans were on the bridge and they knew how to sail the storm. The diplomatic fallout of the revelation was immediate and chaotic. The hegemony, a rigid structure of caste and protocol, found itself fracturing under the weight of the new paradigm. The militarist faction, led by Commander Thrax, initially viewed the human revelation with suspicion, theorizing that the Leviathan data was a fabrication designed to ensure human dominance. They invent a monster to sell us the shield, Thrax argued in the closed sessions of the war room, his mandibles clicking in agitation. They present themselves as saviors from a threat only they can see. It is a classic protection racket. But the data was relentless. The gravitational wake had left scars on the fabric of local spacetime that could be independently verified. The Krell scientists, unbiased and driven only by logic, corroborated the human findings. The displacement mass required to generate such a shear wave is approximately equal to the mass of the galactic core, the Krell Prime unit stated, its voice a synthesized monotone that made the terrifying fact sound mundane. It is not a celestial body. The vector was inconsistent with orbital mechanics. It moved with intent. It changed course. This confirmation shattered the remaining arrogance of the High Council. The universe was not a clockwork mechanism of predictable orbits. It was a biological ecosystem on a scale that rendered civilizations microscopic. The psychological impact on the Ethelgardian populace was devastating. Suicides spiked in the upper castes. The cults of the void, who worshipped the emptiness as a divine purity, collapsed into nihilism. Into this vacuum of spirit stepped the humans, not with religious platitudes, but with the pragmatic stoicism of sailors. They deployed counselors, engineers, and cultural exchange officers. They didn't offer salvation, they offered a life jacket. Admiral Holloway found himself spending more time in the council chambers than on his bridge. He hated the politics, the endless circular debates about resource allocation and jurisdiction, but he understood the necessity. "You cannot fight a hurricane by committee," he told Vrexel during a particularly heated debate about unifying the fleet command codes. "But you cannot survive it without a crew. We need your ships, Counselor. Our hulls can take the hit, but your ships are fast. You have sensors we can't replicate. You have energy weapons that can pierce the density layers of the entities." He hesitated to use the word monsters in diplomatic company, but everyone knew what he meant. Vrexel, who had aged visibly in the weeks since the event, looked at the human with a mixture of resentment and respect. "You ask us to become skirmishers," Vrexel said, "to dart in and out of the jaws of death while you hold the line. It is a suicide doctrine." "It's a whaling doctrine," Holloway corrected. "The Nantucket sleigh ride, we hook the beast, we weigh it down, we tire it out. Then you strike. It's the only way a small species kills a giant." The integration of human and hegemony technology began in earnest. It was a clash of philosophies that produced ugly, beautiful hybrids. The graceful, crystalline ships of the Ethelgard were retrofitted with human mass anchors, ugly lumps of dark iron and gravity coils bolted onto the sleek hulls. Human ships, in turn, were fitted with Ethelgardian energy lances, delicate spires of light rising from the brute force armor plates. The aesthetic was jarring, a visual representation of the desperate alliance. They called the new fleet the Storm Breakers. It was 6 months later when the second wake hit. This time they were not caught unaware. The sensor nets, now expanded and tuned to the fluidic frequencies the humans used, picked up the disturbance 3 parsecs out. It wasn't the massive galaxy-shaking wave of the first encounter. It was smaller, faster, sharper, a scout. "Contact!" yelled the tactical officer aboard the Sargasso *. "Bearing 220 Mark 5. Displacement is equivalent to a gas giant. Speed. God, it's moving at warp 9 without a drive signature. It's swimming through the subspace layers." "Alert the fleet," Holloway ordered, his voice calm. "Formation deep blue, Ethelgard wings, stay behind the pressure shadow until I give the mark." The entity emerged from the warp not like a ship, but like a surfacing whale breaching the water. It was a creature of pure void energy and matter, a shifting, translucent nightmare that seemed to be made of the starfield itself, but distorted, as if the space it occupied was sick. It had no face on. Like a gaping maw of gravity that consumed light. It was beautiful and horrific. It was a predator that fed on the energy of stars, and now it had found a concentration of energy, the Ethelgardian home system. "Target lock," Thrax broadcasted from his flagship, the Light of Purity *. "We are engaging." "Belay that," Holloway snapped. "It's feeding on energy. If you fire lasers at it, you're just giving it a snack. Kinetic rounds only. Deploy the depth charges." The human ships fired. They didn't fire beams of light. They fired massive, solid slugs of tungsten, accelerated to relativistic speeds. They fired canisters of collapsed matter that detonated with the force of a singularity. The depth charges exploded against the creature's hide, creating ripples in its form, disrupting its cohesion. The creature recoiled, letting out a psychic scream that was felt by every telepathic species in the system. It was a sound of confusion. It had never been hit by a rock before. It was used to eating light. "It's turning," Holloway shouted. "It's focusing on the Sargasso *. All power to the keel, brace for impact." The creature lashed out, a tendril of gravity whipping across space to strike the human ship. The impact was cataclysmic. The Sargasso was thrown sideways, its inertial dampeners overwhelmed. Inside, crew were tossed like dolls. Sparks showered the bridge. Holloway tasted blood. "Report. Hull breach on decks 5 through 10. We've lost atmosphere in the port bow. Keel integrity at 40%. "Hold the line," Holloway roared. "Don't let it pass. Vrexel, now strike the joints. Aim for the nodal points where the gravity clusters." The Ethelgardian fleet, hovering in the safety of the Sargasso *S wake, surged forward. They were fast, faster than the creature could track. They darted in, their crystal hulls flashing, and fired their precision lances not at the creature's mass, but at the specific points Holloway had highlighted, the nerve centers of the beast's gravity matrix. The beams cut through the distortion, severing the field lines that held the entity together. The creature shuddered, its form unraveling. It thrashed, destroying 3 Ethelgardian cruisers in a spasm of dying violence, but the cohesion was lost. With a final, silent implosion, it dissolved back into the background radiation of the universe, leaving only a drifting cloud of exotic particles. Silence returned to the system. The Sargasso drifted, burning, bleeding atmosphere but afloat. "Target destroyed," Thrax reported, his voice filled with a savage awe. "By the void." It bled, it actually bled. "We told you," Holloway wheezed, wiping the blood from his eyes. "Everything bleeds if you hit it hard enough." The victory cemented the alliance, but it also confirmed the nightmare. The scout was dead, but where there is a scout, there is a pack. And where there is a pack, there is a mother. The story of the integration of Earth into the hegemony became the story of a civilization preparing for a siege. Earth itself was transformed. The oceans, once seen as a barrier to spaceflight, became the primary training ground for the new galactic fleet. Alien cadets, encased in pressure suits, were lowered into the Marianas Trench to learn the lesson of the deep. That panic is death, that pressure is constant, and that you must respect the dark. They learned that the void of space was not an empty room to be crossed, but a hostile sea to be navigated. They learned the human shanties, the rhythms of work that kept the mind focused when the sensors showed nothing but endless, crushing black. Diplomat Calith became the first Ethel Guardian to swim in Earth's ocean without a suit, using a bioengineered skin graft. The experience changed him. He emerged from the Pacific shivering, terrified, but exhilarated. "It is alive," he told the High Council. "The water, it presses against you. It demands that you exist. The void asks nothing of us, so we became weak. The ocean demands strength." The cultural exchange went both ways. Humans learned the patience of the Ethelgard, the ability to sit in stillness for days, conserving oxygen and energy. They learned the art of the crystal singers, using resonance to detect structural flaws in their hulls before they broke. The terrible war became a war of survival, a war of industry. The asteroid belts were strip-mined to build more anchor ships. The gas giants were harvested for fuel. The galaxy was fortifying itself. And then the signal came. It didn't come from the outer rim. It came from everywhere at once. A low-frequency thrum that vibrated every hull, every bone, every planet crust. It was a song of hunger. Holloway stood on the bridge of the repaired and upgraded Sargasso asterisk. He was older now, his hair completely white, his body scarred from the battles with the scouts. Beside him stood High Counselor Vrexel, no longer a politician, but a war leader, his carapace scarred, a human-style sight. Strapped to his side. "They are here," Vrexel said quietly. "Yeah," Holloway replied, "the whole pod." The sensors showed them, not one, not 10, millions, a wall of living gravity descending from the galactic halo, blocking out the stars. They were coming to feed on the galaxy, to consume the light of the stars and the heat of the cores. It was an extinction event. It was the Great Filter. "We cannot win this," a young tactical officer whispered, looking at the screen. "There are too many." Holloway looked at the officer. He looked at the alien crew members working side by side with humans. He looked at the fleet, tens of thousands of ships, a mix of jagged human iron and elegant alien crystal standing in formation. "We don't have to kill them all," Holloway said. "We just have to survive the storm. We have to be the rock." He keyed the fleet-wide comms. "This is Admiral Holloway. You see the wave. You see the size of it. It looks like the end of the world. Maybe it is. But we are not the people who run from the water. We are the people who build the boats. We are the Ethelgard. We are the humans. We are the fleet of the deep." He paused, letting the silence build. "Lock your shields, anchor your gravity keels. If the universe wants to push us, let it try. We are the unconquerable ocean. We do not break." "For the deep," Vrexel shouted, raising a fist. "For the deep." The fleet responded, a chorus of 1,000 species, unified by the fear of the dark and the courage to face it. The first wave hit. The shields flared, the universe screamed, and the line held. In the center of the chaos, amidst the roaring darkness and the flashes of kinetic artillery, the Sargasso stood like a monolith. Holloway sat in his chair, watching the tide of monsters crash against his ship. He wasn't smiling anymore. He was working. "Reroute power to the forward batteries," he ordered calmly. "And get me another cup of coffee. It's going to be a long night." The terrible war had begun. But as the aliens looked at the humans, at their grim determination, at their absolute refusal to accept the inevitability of death, they realized something profound. The title of the ancient human text was right. The ocean was unconquerable. Not because the water was strong, but because the things that learned to swim in it were stronger. The monsters of the void had come to eat the stars. But they had forgot to check if the stars had teeth. The battle raged for weeks, a grinding attrition that turned the sector into a graveyard of ships and carcasses. The entities, mindless in their hunger, threw themselves against the wall of iron that the Alliance had constructed. They were not used to resistance. For eons, they had swept through galaxies like a fire through dry grass, consuming civilizations that relied on energy shields and flight. But here, they met mass. They met density. They met a species that understood that sometimes you have to take a punch to throw one. In the final hours of the siege, when the ammunition was running low and the reactors were near critical, a new phenomenon occurred. The constant use of the gravity anchors, the millions of overlapping fields generated by the fleet, began to have an unforeseen effect on the local space-time. The fabric of the universe, stressed to its breaking point, began to harden. The fluidic space that the entities swam through began to freeze. "Admiral," Scholar Calith shouted from the science station, "the metric is solidifying. We are accidentally creating a stasis field. The sheer density of our formation is collapsing the slipstream." Holloway looked at the readout. "If we collapse the slipstream, we trap them." "Yes," Calith cried, "but we trap ourselves too. We will be frozen in time, locked in amber, potentially for thousands of cycles until the field decays." Holloway looked at the tactical map. The entities were breaking through the left flank. If they didn't stop them now, the core worlds would be eaten. "Vrexel," Holloway said, turning to his friend, "you hear that? We can stop them, but the price is, we don't go home, not for a long time." Vrexel looked at the image of his home world on the secondary screen. Then he looked at Holloway. "The Ethelgard believe that stasis is perfection," Vrexel said, a dry humor in his voice. "To be frozen in the moment of our greatest victory. There is a poetry to it." "All ships," Holloway broadcasted. "This is the final order. Initiate protocol iceberg. Overload your gravity keels. Sink your fields with the asterisk Sargasso asterisk. We're going to freeze the sea." There was no hesitation. The fear had burned away days ago. There was only duty. "Synchronizing," the computer announced. "Field density approaching infinity." The monsters sensed the trap. They screamed, a psychic wail of panic, and tried to flee back into the deep dark. But the water was turning to ice around them. The space between the ships began to crystallize, turning. A milky white. Time began to slow. The flashes of the guns elongated into streaks of permanent light. Holloway watched the bridge slow down. He saw the coffee in his cup ripple in slow motion. He saw Vrexel raising a hand in a slow salute. He saw the monster on the main screen, its maw open, frozen in a silent roar. Not a bad way to go, Holloway thought as the ice took him. Unconquerable. The field snapped shut, 10,000 years later. A scout ship from a young, new civilization entered the sector. They were explorers, eager and naive. They had detected a massive anomaly, a region of space where time did not flow, a great white spot on the galactic map. They approached the edge of the anomaly with caution. Their sensors pierced the haze of the time field. "By the Maker," the captain whispered. There, preserved in perfect, frozen clarity, was a battlefield of titans. Millions of ships locked in combat with shadowy leviathans. It was a statue garden on a cosmic scale. In the center, a massive, scarred black cylinder stood nose to nose with the largest of the monsters, a lance of pure solid matter driven through the beast's heart. The young captain zoomed in on the hull of the central ship. The writing was ancient, in a language they did not speak, but the translation matrix deciphered it from the old archives. "UNS Sargasso, what is it?" the pilot asked. "Is it a tomb?" "No," the captain said, reading the energy readings coming from the ice. The field was decaying. The heart of the ship was still beating. A signal was slowly leaking out, a repeating broadcast on an ancient frequency. The captain played the audio. It was a rhythmic, pulsing sound, like a sonar ping, like a heartbeat. And then a voice, slow, deep, and impossibly patient. "Station keeping holding. The ice is melting. Stand by to re-engage." The captain pulled the ship back in terror and awe. The statues were moving. The war wasn't over. The watchers of the deep were waking up. They thought the ocean was unconquerable. They were right, because the ocean never sleeps. It just waits. And when the ice breaks, the terrible war begins again. But this time the galaxy knows the legend. This time they know that when the monsters come, the humans will be there, standing on the bridge, ready to hold the line. The young scout ship turned and fled, speeding back to tell their people the news. The gods were not dead. They were just holding their breath, and the universe was about to exhale.